You have, in book 1, you have what he calls the literal interpretation, the historia. And then book 2 is the theoria, the spiritual interpretation or contemplative meaning of the text. But it's funny because you read book 1 and it's already clear that the literal meaning of the Sinai theophany is not simply the Israelites freed from Egypt now getting their law and being constituted as a nation. It's about a theophany. It's about the revelation of God in this mysterious set of events on the Holy Mountain. Okay? That's literally what it's about. Don't be distracted, by a simplistic or superficial reading of history. Okay? Not that history is not important, it's just it pales in importance with what's really happening on the mountain when Moses enters into the presence of God. He is blinded by the darkness. He experiences a sort of spiritual vertigo on the mountain. And God has to stand him in the rock, stand him in the hole in the rock so that he can be stabilized as the divine presence passes by. Okay, so there's the tablets kind of get overshadowed by these mystical events of the theophany itself. And of course, the scopas of Scripture, again, you find this in Origin, you find it in all the Cappadocians. Scripture points us toward Jesus Christ. The meaning of everything in the Bible. We just have to be very careful when we see the word historia in patristic exegetical usage, whether it's Origin, whether it's the Antiochenes, whether it's Gregory. Historia doesn't mean just, you open the text and the meaning falls out. It really doesn't mean what a lot of people think of when they think of the literal sense, the transparent sense, or the plain sense. It means the narrative coherence of the text, which feeds then into the spiritual meaning of the text. Okay? And there is obviously a very important relationship between apologia and historia. But certainly Gregory would have wanted to say, yeah, there's some real history. There's a sequence of events here that happened in ancient Israel and so on. But there's always the push to move beyond the historia to the theoria. And they are intimately related to each other. We already got a little taste yesterday of Gregory's dogmatic exegesis, the way he's working through biblical texts in terms of dogmatic problems like the Trinity. Look at, again, at Proverbs 8:22. What's he doing with that text? The Lord created me, the beginning of his works. Remember, wisdom is speaking, personified wisdom. That text has been thrown into this great Trinitarian controversy. Arians are using it. Now anti-Arians are trying to rehabilitate the text. Okay. And Gregory is, in his own way, looking for the plain sense of the text, the literal meaning of the text, in terms of the skopos. What is it really about ultimately? Okay. And you remember he applies Athanasius' double rule. This is the human Christ speaking, not the divinity. And so Gregory is familiar with the fact that when we get down to interpreting the scriptures theologically and doctrinally, we're going to have to be very careful, not only in sort of analyzing the text within its own context, like comparing it to everything else in the Bible. That's a fundamental rule for early Christian exegetes across the board. Scripture interprets Scripture. And you patiently go through that process of comparison, working on understanding how all these texts fit together. At last, you discern the skopos of the text. Okay? Or, in this instance, the theologically literal meaning